and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sunset TV. And in this episode, we are looking at a subject which does come up for serious discussions from time to time, is the dwindling aircraft and fighter aircraft inventory of the Indian Air Force and the increasing challenge to India's territories from two reasonably well-equipped and powerful enemies. One is China, one is Pakistan. How does the Indian Air Force plan to cope with the two-front threat, and what is it that the Air Force can adopt as a support system to the fighter aircraft inventory other than fighter aircrafts to ensure that we continue to defend our airspace and our territories as effectively as we would be required to by the Government of India. And I have two hands-on experts who will help us understand these issues. And we have with us Air Marshal Amit Aneja, who has been in various positions at Air Headquarters, including Principal Director of Flying Training at the Air Headquarters, has been Commandant of Air Force Academy, and of course a fighter pilot to reckon with. And alongside him, we have had a guest who's been with us on previous occasions. We have Air Marshal P.K. Srivastav, who not only has a sterling record of service in the Air Force, but has served in the corporate sector, has been involved with India's missile programs, and therefore has covered the entire spectrum of India's air capabilities. And I'll start with you, Air Marshal Srivastav. Sir, how is it that we can overcome the shortage of fighter aircrafts in the interim? Because I'm told on one side that there is a requirement for the Tejas making up the shortage of aircrafts as MiG-21s are being phased out. Soon the Mirage will also be phased out. And we've had the Air Force Chief go on record just before Air Force Day to say that the project to get 12 additional Sukhois and 21 MiG-29s is currently deferred. And therefore, we are looking at getting fighter aircrafts from our own indigenized manufacturing base. But there is another issue with it. And the issue connected with it is, could the increasingly efficient missile programs that we have help us supplement this gap till about 2028, 2029, when we'll have more or less about 36 to 38 squadrons, though the Air Force keeps harping on 42 squadrons. So I've given you a very longish question, but do please get us in perspective before I go to the Air Marshal.
So Maruf, I would like to say one thing. We have all been talking about it, that we need the fighter aircraft since 2006. It's been going on. It's an ongoing tussle. And in the meantime, the paradigm shift has taken place in the way we fight the war. So let me anchor it from one perspective. If I have threats from two different directions, northern and western, what is that is holding these countries not to really come on to us in that vigorous way as they are coming? Because as you always talk about it, there is an element of geography involved. So as far as northern sector is concerned, China, if they want to become an aggressor, they'll have to fight it out through the Himalayas. And air power will play a dominant role in that. We are better placed because they are on a higher place and we are at lower place. Anything flying out from there will have half the weapons, half the fuel capacity and half the power.
I'm aware of that.
You are aware
now,
of. Let me put it in the context of Air Force.
What is the interim counter we have to cope with the threat, two-front threat?
So, having been from both the sectors where we manufacture the capability, air capability, and where we exploit the air capability, let me tell you one thing, that we had a kind of doctrine for ourselves with this: preserve, upgrade, acquire. Now, preserve is our basic forte. If you really see, Air Force, Indian Air Force has a maintenance command where we have this wherewithal and structure of logistics and the maintenance. When they put together, they are able to preserve their aircraft for a very, very long time, and obsolescence management is phenomenal. and you saw the Abhinandan case where he was able to defeat an F-16 with a MiG-21 disc.
So Pakistan and the US denies it.
Yeah, they deny it.
Okay, so you've made your point.
So, let me come to the next point. Now, when we talk about total number of aircraft, fighter aircraft which need are approximately 900. What we have today, after all the iteration, we have 500. By 2032, we need to now retire several other fleets. So, how do you fill this gap? This has been the problem. It has been done on your show earlier also. See, the idea is we go into the unmanned sector. We now harness the technologies or take the technologies on board, and that's how we have developed our defense acquisition method or procedure. Idea is now we are focusing on indigenization, because the moment you focus on indigenization, you are able to improve teeth to tail ratio. Teeth can become bigger, because if the whole thing, the equipment lies within your own territory, the wherewithal for maintaining or sustaining it, then you are in a very good position to actually keep it preserved and keep it fight worthy. Number of sorties per day by any combat aircraft will determine how this aircraft is effective and how many sorties you can generate per day. That will be your measure of your doing this, and in that Indian Air Force top ranks.
Okay,
let me also.
Okay, on that happy note, Air Marshal Aneja sir, 2 points. One is, I go back to the issue, we are accepting the reality, there's a shortage of aircraft. We are accepting the reality that it's not going to be made up overnight. It will take at least 6 to 8 years to us have some level of parity with our strategic doctrine. Forget what the enemy is doing. Our doctrine is based on a variety of other factors. And therefore, I quote from a paper that Air Marshal Chopra has written, who is the Director General of Center for Air Power Studies, and where he has talked about that our ability to, say for example, the Chinese are modernizing at a hectic pace. Our ability to knock off just 2 Chinese airfield in each sector would have a debilitating effect, those are my words, debilitating effect on the Chinese capability to hit us. Secondly, do we now look at the possibilities and wait because of Atmanirbhar Bharat that Tejas Mark 1 or Mark 1A or Tejas 2 will help us tide over a crisis, or our enemy will wait for us to get suitably equipped before they go in for a confrontation? Or can we do one of the 2 other things, which is can we look at the option of increasing our Rafale fleet, because Rafale is way ahead of anything in the neighborhood? Or thirdly, should we look at leasing some aircrafts instead of buying them so that we make up in the interim? Or finally, should we look at another option, that to beef up our air capacity, which is the number of missile programs that we have? You know, we have these highly effective programs that I've been reading about, and I've been very impressed with them. Like, for example, we have the, what is it called, Negram or something, and we have these missiles, Nirbhay, and we have another program which is basically going to give us the capacity to pinpointedly hit targets without taking on an air-to-air combat situation. Now, you're a fighter pilot. Tell me, where does this all come in? It's a very long question, but I think you need to give us a perspective on that.
First of all, I think I'll pick up from where you ended. I think we need all of them.
Well, all armed forces in the world have a long wish list, and no government can meet.
This is on a lighter note. Let's say, first of all, let's not talk about numbers. We always get trapped into this thing about numbers.
Yeah.
42 squadron you mentioned somewhere earlier when you were talking to Air Marshal. I think, and also you mentioned that no country is sitting waiting for you to build your capacity.
Yes.
Okay. So I think the best way to look at your capability or your operational readiness in terms of comparative capability.
Absolutely.
Which has to be driven by your aspirations. Where do you want to be? 10 years from now, if you have certain aspirations to be a certain, ability to affect the global order, then that becomes your determinant to then value time. Unfortunately, as the years have gone by, we haven't valued time, and I think that is one simple key determinant where we have missed out. And I think best thing is to catch up now, because time is money, time is operational capability, time is your future. Having said that, what we have and what we want to acquire, for example, you said, do we want more Rafales? Indeed, we want more Rafales, but that's a different issue. We have 36 aircraft, and I think in any operational wisdom, 36 aircraft as a total size of the fleet over a long term period, 40 years of aircraft life cycle, is, I think, slightly unsound.
That's on the lower side.
It's on the lower side. It's on the-
I am aware that the Air Force is pushing for another 114 fighter aircraft.
No, that's a different,
at least.
not
so,
Rafale.
with or without Rafale, because one air chief in one discussion with me has said that the capacity that Rafale brings to bear helps you to relook at your obsession with the squadron numbers. Your views?
Before I come to this, let me just complete my chain of thought as I was talking to you earlier. So now, if we can't acquire so quickly, Tejas, etc., whatever we are doing, I hope it picks up in terms of speed, innovation, Atmanirbharta, etc., missiles that you mentioned, catches on. But I think one thing that we have to care for is, if you look at the key determinants of fifth generation capabilities, purely in terms of what we are talking about, then I think one is in terms of fighter maneuver capability and stealth, that is one part. Next is sensor fusion and integration, and the third one is in terms of capability to operate in a network centric environment. This is a very important aspect which can give you a maximum bang for the buck, and that's an area where probably Air Marshal would be able to talk about. Yes. It's an interesting area, that in short time frame, what should be of area of focus to get the maximum, because eventually,
Absolutely.
Let's just accept the fact that today's world, knowledge is power. As we've gone into the 21st century, it is digital world. It is processing power of your computers. So if you can have your our aircraft today, you talked about Rafale, Mirage 2000, etc., they have the capability to perform in a network centric environment, which means software is the driving force. And today, if you can empower with software, then you will find your assurance levels, your capability, destructive capability increases. And just as a tickle before we come back to this point again, is your decision cycles. You see, today we have started talking about whole of government approach, which means that any warfare using military as an instrument of power cannot be taken in isolation, let alone looking at Army, Navy and Air Force separately, where people keep talking about, why jointmanship, etc. I think today jointmanship is across the instruments of power, across the full spectrum of dime. Your diplomatic, informational, your military and economic instrument of power have to fight together today. So jointmanship, we should talk across that, and your decision cycles should move faster and faster with quality data, so that from observation to action, you do the whole thing more efficiently and smartly.
Very well put, sir. Now, I'm going to go back to you, Air Marshal. I'm picking up on the points he's made and diverting from some of the questions I have initially in my mind. And one of them is that, the whole use of multiple technology bases that the Chinese are using to further their capability, not just with J-10, J-17, J-20 fighter aircraft, but also the H-6 bombers and various other things. But the Chinese are using a number of technologies, which jamming systems, acquiring information about our operational plans, how to respond. So one is that, and the second is that the IAF and the Air Marshal made another very good point. The numbers are issues that are being thrown up about 38 squadron, 42 squadron, whatever. But the IAF has steadily being supplemented by the entire edifice of our national security and defense indigenization base, and which is multiple force multipliers. One of them is the I-STAR, which, as you know, is intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition and reconnaissance aircraft. At the other end of the spectrum is a number of missiles with massive kinetic power. Your view?
So, you rightly said that the technology will essentially hold the key when we go to these areas, and if we see what Chinese are doing. And let me take one point which is coming out very clearly, and we are also moving forward on that spectrum, is that artificial intelligence in all its manifestations. If you look at the drone inventory of China, they got a whole command kind of thing for the drones, all levels of drones. So drones are nothing but and we look at, let me anchor it around two aspects. One is OODA, the observe, orient, decide and act loop. What does drone do? That in the autonomous chain, it can put you really the act part also onto the drone. That means the algorithms and the machine itself can decide when to launch and annihilate the target. That is one spectrum. And second spectrum is what we see, that we always say whatever you develop a technology, and by the time it becomes an operational product, there's a in between which we call valley of death. The whole thing dies there. You are not able to go beyond that because it never becomes a product. So that journey, how do we bridge? That journey has to be bridged through some kind of acquisition while you are into this valley and trying to find your ways. So let's put it what we are good at. We are really good at missile technology. As far as rocket science is concerned, which is called rocket science, we are really good at it. That is one thing we are good at, and we got good programs running there, right from surface to air missiles, air to air missiles, and which you read out, cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, and Agni Prithvi kind of class of missiles, strategic missiles. So we have a deterrent built out there that if you attack us, we can precisely attack you.
Quick question.
Okay.
Why doesn't the Air Force build that into its repeated claims that we want more squadrons?
So now it's not that they're leaving it out, but there's always, we have a kind of, I would say, precursor or postcursor of our past. It goes along with me. Like Air Marshal is a fighter pilot, and if you ask a fighter pilot to really get rid of the combat aircraft, there's a degree of inbuilt resistance. But what happens today, tomorrow's world needs both. If you're going for a swarm attack, let's say, which is going to become very common as we move another 5-6 years in the spectrum of conflict, you will find that you need a manned aircraft in between, and the wingman will be the aircraft which are autonomous or UCAVs. So if you really ask me what is my quick solution at the moment, how do I get over the kind of fear factors we have? So we have a program which is an advanced stage where we want to buy Predator class of UCAVs from US. There are a lot of things happening, but it has not come to a fruition. Of course, government is quite keen on it. It's a government to government model that is like Rafale, will fill that unmanned thing. It will cross that valley of death where we still have time to do our things. Secondly, the procedures. I am very, if you really ask me, one thing we need to really get pull up our socks. There are procedures which are there to bring a technology and cross this valley of death has to be improved. Now we got Make 1, Make 2, Make 3, which in our times was not there. And these procedures give you power to really cross this valley very fast.
Okay. Air Marshal sir, I go back to an issue which I need clarifications for. I read somewhere that the Air Force needs more aircraft to fulfill the variety of its roles that it is to undertake, whether at peace or at war. One of them is combat air patrols. At the same time, the issue is that we have X number of trained pilots. You can't have that many trained pilots without providing them aircrafts to carry out the roles that they are expected to carry out in peace and in war. Is there a way out? And I know you might be held to book by your other colleagues to say that why did you abandon the stated Air Force position that without 42 squadrons we are incapable of taking on all the threats. Is there a way out in the interim as we graduate quickly, hopefully, hoping that in the next 6 to 8 years we don't have a two-front war thrust on us?
Excellent question. Firstly, a slight modification to what you said. Definitely we are short on the platforms, but not certainly, as you mentioned, specifically for the purpose of combat air patrol. As you are aware, the kind of aircraft that we have today are they don't have a specific role. Their flexibility of utilization takes them across strike as well as air defense at the same time, and combat air patrol is a point of point defense as used to have, which has now gone to limited area defense or layer defense rather. We go right in and detect early and identify early, intercept early and destroy early. But leave that aside for a moment. Let's see what sustains an air force. A good air force, how it's sustained amongst the challenges that we're talking about. One is your platforms. Second is your sensors and weapons, which are improving by the day. Third is your tactics, and how do you intend deploying and employing these assets that you have. But there are two intangible areas which we usually do not touch with the same kind of emphasis, and these are training and airman to airman relationship. A soldier must think like a soldier. I will leave the last part to that, but your training part, I think, is an area which we neglect. We always, and he spent his entire life in the Air Force trying to make sure that the aircraft are there available for people to fly, and so therefore the spares and those kind of things, online availability, etc. But we never look at what will happen 5 years from now when you have Rafales and even better quality aircraft and you have better sensors. How are you going to integrate them? Do we spend the time on training for the future starting now, because everything is called hibernation time? What am I coming to? I am coming to the fact that if you are going into a 5th generation and 5.5 generation time frame, then you have to invest in your training tools today, which will give you a force multiplication effect which you won't get otherwise with the platform. You will in fact save the platform. Now what am I talking about? I had a little brush with corporate for a few years. I worked with an Israeli company, so that's why certain kind of exposure. You see, we have if I may take just 2 minutes, we have usual emphasis on platform centric simulations. I think we need to springboard, if I may use the term, and jump into the area of mission centric simulations. Right. Today mission centric simulations are possible where multi-dimensional assets are available, your enemies are in the air, generated synthetically, etc., in a very realistic environment. So I used to use a term called LIMA, lead into mission accomplishment. Eventually, what does a commander want, or what does a nation want? If you want to impose your will on an enemy, you want assurance of what you want to do with a minimum or zero damage. If you
Okay. So those are very, very important points you raised, and I'm going to come back to you with the last question after this, where I want you to give us how this can be applied to the current threat scenario. I'll come to that. Air Marshal sir, now you have understanding of missile programs and various technologies that go into air defense and air effective kinetic capability other than aircraft. Now I want to bring out 3 missiles that seem to have caught my attention. One is the Akash missile, which is a medium range mobile surface to air missile, and it is developed by the DRDO, and you said our missile program is world class. Second is Akash Prime, which even has, I believe, a little higher range and could be looking at hitting targets at 25 to 30 kilometers, as well as go up to heights of 4,500 and fly as low as 100 meters or so above the air. Then we have the missile program of Surya Lanka, which is again a world-class missile program which direct kill, further establishing the capability that our missile programs have. And finally, and apparently the Air Force has got the Akash in our various forward airfields. I'm not going to give the names. Then we have another missile program which is now catching everyone's attention, and this is the BrahMos program. And BrahMos program is obviously something which makes China very nervous. Now, when we have all this, are we going to be able, you talked about the gray zone or the dead zone, and in battlefields such as across the Himalayas, you have the valleys, and they need to be also covered. So how do we stop the infiltration of troops which will happen from our adversary with air power backing it up with the use of effective missile program?
So if you give me a little time, I'll tell you.
So we don't have much time.
Okay, so I'll quickly run over it. So basically, issue is I was connected with the Akash program right from the beginning. I produced it. I signed the contract, the
Wow.
first 2 regiments,
Okay.
and I produced it. So I know about it. I know the pluses and the minuses. But this program is a dated program. I told you the Valley of Death. By the time it got approved and we really had it in the operations, there was so much of time spent that technology became obsolescent the way it is going. So next, which you talked about, the Akash Prime, which is also known as Akash NG, new generation, this will have other limitations taken care of. What is our limitation? In the contested environment where communication is contested and your radar spectrum is contested and is being jammed, can you still send your missile and achieve the goal? What we are trying to do, there are 2 aspects of war fighting and conflict. One is beyond visual range. These missiles give us that power that we can really launch from a range where they can't harm us, and second is precision. So with everything we are improving the precision. As far as BrahMos program is concerned and BrahMos the air version is concerned, that is a very beautiful program because it is giving you precision and it can fly through the contested environment.
Quick last question. You talked about all these spectrums. Now we have a spectrum that we need to get real about, and that is the Chinese threat along the LAC and the Himalayas. 2 issues. Radar monitoring of activity in the high Himalayas and beyond is more limited than it is in the plains vis-a-vis the Pakistanis. And the Pakistanis are suitably equipped by the Chinese. In a best case scenario, if China and India have a confrontation, the Pakistanis will give their airfields to the Chinese to use. In a worst case scenario, they'll also attack us along with the Chinese. What are your immediate and short thoughts on that? And we'll end with that.
Good one. Firstly, not a kind of scenario I'd like to imagine. But let me tell you, even if both of them were to come together, you give me a bloody nose, I'll break your skull. We have that kind of a capability. Whatever we do must be to make sure that the key tenets of air power, particularly when we are working in an environment of diversity as well as shortage, it is best to use, let me put it in cricketing terms, play on the front foot, which means if you can add efficiency to what you have, and flexibility is retained and encouraged with better communication and better spinning of the OODA loop. And for spinning the OODA loop or the decision cycle, I think participative growth, I must underline this, and that participative is not Army, Navy and Air Force, I alluded to it earlier.
Yeah, is also the civilian leadership.
The civilian leadership, if we can understand each other's point of view, it is not my country alone, it is your country, and everything is Indian Administrative Service, it's Indian Army, it's Indian Police
Service. Okay, got your point, sir. Actually, we'll have to end here because we're completely short of time. But the purpose of this show is to get our civilian leaders to understand in a brief, encapsulated manner a challenge and the answers, and I think you've provided that. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for your wisdom. Until our next episode, goodbye.